Hello and good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. Is that Arrow?
Yeah, that's me.
Hey, Arrow. It's Steve Fishman.
It's such a pleasure to share a conversation with you again, dude. I mean, and then because I'm really excited to hear about this director's cuts because I experienced the podcast. Now I want to know what are you up to?
Yeah. Well, the director's cut is Arrow. We're on. I just start talking.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the director's cut is, in some ways, it's an update. You know, we put out 7 episodes of Empire and Blood in 2018. It reached #1. People were really excited about it. 6 years later, we have followed these characters. They've had lives. Some of them have soared. Some of them have, frankly, hit bottom. And, you know, we just felt that these characters alive in the world deserved not only an update, but really a sense of the drama that followed the drama we covered.
Yeah, because, you know, one of the things that I'm very proud of you guys for doing this, for these 3 extra episodes, is because I always wonder during these true crime podcasts, how is it that you can just suddenly end it? And I'm glad that you guys are taking it forward knowing, hey, you know, just because it's off the front page of the newspaper, everybody is still involved in this story.
Absolutely. And, you know, our lead character, Cal, a little bit of a spoiler alert, but our lead character is Cal, who is the guy who says he's wrongfully convicted of a double murder. Well, our series follows him to the end of his, frankly, 20-year determined campaign to prove his innocence. And then we leave him sleeping in a van in his girlfriend's driveway. Well, we wanted to know what happened to Cal 6 years later. I mean, here you have a guy who, frankly, has beat the criminal justice system in the Bronx, and now he's essentially homeless. Well, we followed him to a mansion in Houston. I mean, the guy is now, and he's gotten a settlement of many millions of dollars, $5 million. But at the same time, this is a guy who was a crack dealer in the Bronx, and frankly, he treated that as a business. And then he puts his business sense to work in the legitimate world. So it's kind of amazing to me. I mean, the drive, the kind of ruthlessness that this guy had, and frankly, that he learned and demonstrated on the streets, he now puts to work creating a van service that transports people to prisons to visit their loved ones. You know, now Cal was a guy who, while he was in prison, he wrote 7 business plans, and it's kind of hilarious because under experience, he ran a business under very difficult circumstances, and he's referring to his drug business on the corner of a place called Corner of Blood. Well, he comes out and he tackles this crowded field, and essentially what he does is succeed. He goes from borrowing his girlfriend's car to having a fleet of 5 Mercedes Sprinter buses. So it's kind of an incredible story of Cal. And then I'll give you an example of another guy. People who have dipped their toe in the podcast may remember Father Frank.
Yes.
The detective. The detective, Frank Vigiano. He's the guy who essentially saves the case for the prosecution. Now, that case, as we learned, probably wasn't worth saving. But we learn about Father Frank, extremely likable, star detective in the Bronx, a guy who earned the nickname Father Frank because he was really good at getting confessions. Well, fast forward 20 years, 31 of those cases in which he helped get confessions have been reopened to be re-examined because of the methods he used to get those confessions.
Wow. Wow. You know, it's almost like a Marvel movie. I mean, but yet it plays out real.
Yeah, you know, we have the sequels. We have the continuations. And frankly, you know, we had spent I've been in and out of that story for 7 years. We talked to. What was extraordinary for us is that everybody involved spoke, and Arrow, that there was a character who called himself Turtle Man, extremely capable prosecutor, who a single guy living in Westchester with 20 turtles who roamed the house, and thus Turtle Man. But he's a guy, who's at the top of his game, who's really out there to do justice, and he puts Cal away. Now, the fascinating thing about the story is everybody's more or less dealing with the same set of facts, but they have a completely different interpretation of them. Yeah. So we pit Turtle Man against Calvin and this famous civil rights attorney, and we set them in motion. I was in and out of this story for 7 years. So you can imagine we have a lot of tape that ended up on the cutting room floor. Some of that tape I just loved and was really worth bringing back. So we've been able to do that in the director's cut as well.
See, I was going to ask you about that. If you were inside that production room during the editing period, because of all the stuff that you've been collecting from it, to me, it may not fit into the story now, but somewhere along the way, it can come back, and you're proving that.
Absolutely. I mean, we went to, when I say we, there was this private investigator that I connected with who was investigating the case for Calvin, the defendant. Very strange and interesting guy. Born again, runs a church in his house, carries around a Bible and a gun.
And a gun, yep.
As he calls them, law and order. He gets a tip that there are these witnesses in North Carolina, so 700 or 800 miles away, who actually saw the crime 30 years earlier.
Wow.
So he and I take a long train ride to see these people, and we're the first people, and I'm certainly the first journalist, to ever hear them testify to what they saw that day. And it's a very powerful story. But to your question about the cutting room floor, one of the characters had a nickname. She was called Evilina. And we don't really find out why. It's a toss-up line. She's got an angry mood and you want to get out of her way when she's angry. Eyeballs bulging and the mouth slips into gear. But there are all kinds of things about her story that led her there. Her mother, the crack addict,
yep,
and how she grows up in this very harsh environment and struggles. And so we're able to kind of round out the stories. Like Marvel, you learn a lot about the backstories of the character that you've come to know and hopefully like.
With you investing 7 years of your life into this project, there's no way that you can easily shake it. Your eye still has to be on the ground, probably still watching for new clues.
Absolutely, and I have to say, sometimes, you're scrolling through your computer or your Google Drive and that phone number comes up of that one person you could never talk to, of that one person who you knew if you could get them to talk, they would have an eyeful to tell you about. And so I'm always kind of noodling with that possibility. But I have to tell you, being in that case was a bit of a disease for me. I mean, I was a staff writer at New York Magazine doing a lot of big stories for New York Magazine. And frankly, this took a lot of time away from my main pursuit and my money-making pursuit. Yep. And, it may not have been great for my career. So I resist, and my wife, who was somewhat tired of hearing about the story, encourages me to resist. Now, that said, and you learn about this in the 3 bonus episodes, Cal and I have become friends. Cal's been to my house for dinner. I own a bar in the neighborhood. He's been to my bar. There's another character who some of you may remember in the podcast, whose name is Email. His life has just soared. He ended up taking a plea, really under pressure, to get out of prison for a crime he claims he didn't commit. Well, He takes a plea after 19 years, goes home, he's home for Christmas. The district attorney in Brooklyn agrees to reinvestigate that case, and they come up with a confession, not from Emil, but from the real killer. And so Emil's life changes overnight. He's not only got the burden of a murder conviction removed from his record, but he is in line for compensation now for having been wrongfully convicted. And Emil and I have become good friends too. Emil visited me in the hospital when my wife and I had a baby, and coincidentally, it was March 16th, 2023. 2022. Forgive me. And that was the day that Emil was in court to be exonerated. I wanted to go and be there for in effect, the ceremony, but I'm not going to leave my wife in the hospital.
Exactly.
But she says to me, "Go, you got to be there. He's our friend. You got to be there." And so I went, and my son is born on the day that Emil is in effect reborn, and it's always bonded us.
The things that you invest your life into, and now you've got a brand new beginning with the birth of your child. I mean, that just shocks me that things like that come together.
It is, and it's nice. I mean, life is long and interesting, and lives intersect. Lives intersect, and people go up and go down. Listen. Bit of a non sequitur, but my father, before he passed, I had a conversation with him. He was ailing, and finally, one day I said to him, it was listen, it's a son's impertinence. I said, "Dad, why are you so determined to live so long?" He was half blind, he couldn't walk, and he said, "I want to see how the story ends."
Yes.
And I've always remembered that. And, the stories continue. They continue in the director's cut. And frankly, they continue afterwards in my life.
Yeah.
People come into your life and they make it richer.
Don't you think that you've taken journalism to a whole new level? Because if Edward R. Murrow were here today, I really think that he would see how the journalists today are really digging into the meat of the story.
Well, I thank you for that thought. I mean, obviously, journalists are widely disparaged, but I see an incredible determination to get to the bottom of stories.
Yeah.
And I'm not the only person that's very involved in people who claim to be wrongfully convicted. Now, by the way, not everybody who claims it is wrongfully convicted. And I'll tell your listeners, there is a difference between being wrongfully convicted and being innocent. Wrongful conviction means you didn't get a fair trial.
Ooh.
Being innocent means that you didn't do the crime. And there's a difference. And I can remember one attorney telling me, if the system is running right, some guilty people will have their convictions overturned. Well, that's a pretty obnoxious idea for this average citizen like you and me. But this attorney assured me that it's worth having the system run right, and to pay that price. Now, to your question, Arrow, I do think that there are a lot of journalists who dig into stories and find things out that are hidden, that normal journalists, and by normal journalists, I mean those people who are captive to internet journalism, to daily journalism, who have to produce, 3 stories a day, the kinds of things they can't do. I'll also say that it comes at a sacrifice. I'm in and out of this story for 7 years. I am not earning a living on this story. Now, I never earned a living on this story, but I didn't get paid anything for 6 of those years. So it takes a certain kind of pathology to be involved in those stories. But for me, they really are the most rewarding.
Listeners need to understand that they can find this on iHeartRadio, and what they need to do to get into season 3. First of all, if they're brand new to it, they need to listen to it from the very beginning. But if they were part of the other seasons, you have to scroll all the way down to pick up the episodes, and they're there. And it's just like, it was just when the continuation letter came in, I was going, oh my God! And I'm just so proud of you for building this story and continuing it.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, the name of the podcast is Empire on Blood, which actually is a name that comes from one of the characters who may have been the real killer, but also was a kind of poet. And he leaned back. I interviewed him in prison, and he was a drug dealer with Cal, and he said, you know, we thought we could build an empire on blood.
Oh, my God.
And that always just struck me. So the name of the podcast we took from that, Empire on Blood, and it is season 2. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, on the iHeart application as well. It is, Errol, thank you for pointing this out. It's season 2, and it is not always easy to find. You know, for some reason, Apple puts season 1 at the top.
That's it.
So you need to scroll to the bottom.
Yep. They sure did. Because it took a little bit of a struggle and writing emails back to the people that represent you, and it's like, oh my God, there it is. Yeah. So that's, and listeners need to know that just it's there. But if you've not heard the podcast, you've got to start from the beginning and experience the entire journey.
I think that's right. And you know, Aaron, I'll take the opportunity to say that season 1 is a bit of a prequel or sequel to the Empire on Blood. It's called The Burden. Mm-hmm. Empire on Blood takes place in the Bronx. For The Burden, we moved to Brooklyn, and we dig really deep. We get into the belly of the beast, you know, into 80s and 90s New York. People won't remember. Actually, people don't believe it was like this unless they really are familiar with it. But, you know, there were 2,500 murders in 1 year in New York City. I mean, what's that, like 7 a day, 6 a day?
Wow.
There were like one weekend you could pick up the newspaper on a Monday and read about 50 people being shot over a weekend. I mean, it was frightening in New York City. And we accompanied this detective. This is a detective who was famous and now infamous, and he agreed to cooperate with us and tell us his story. And we spent 35 hours recording him.
Wow.
And finding out what it was like to go into the belly of that beast. Now, he's a guy whose story has been revised over the years. He really was the guy who got the hardest to get confessions and locked up the worst criminals. And he was a great-looking detective and walked with a swagger and smoked a cigar everywhere. You know, like Kojak had his lollipop. Detective Scarcella had his cigar. Fast forward 25 years, 21 of the people he helped convict have had their convictions overturned. So we go in and we will tell you exactly what happened. And the part of The Burden that I love is 3 of the people who he helped convict were part of founding a law firm in prison. So these guys, none of whom had graduated from high school, they teach themselves the law. They sit in the law library. They get together. They find out they have the same detective in their case. All of them claim to be innocent. And they start filing motions. And frankly, from prison, they start the charge that leads to the undoing of this famous detective.
Wow. Steve, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. You know this door is always going to be open for you.
I really appreciate that. You've got a great show. I was listening to some past episodes. I just love listening to the way people tell their stories. And, you know, there are so many fascinating stories out there. And, Aaron, you have a way of capturing them that really I compliment you.
Well, please be brilliant today, okay, sir?
Will do. Thank you so much.